Alrighty, hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a game that's very, very special to our channel's history. This is God of War 4. So this came out 2019, I believe, on the PS4. And I'll let you go straight into. Oh, was it 2018? There you go.
It was 2018.
2018. Yep. Forget that it's 2020 already.
Yeah. Time flies.
Yeah, came out 2018 on the PS4. And I'll hand it off to you because you've definitely got quite a lot of history with this series. So.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so obviously we're talking about God of War, a game which came from the PS2 originally as sort of almost like puzzle / hack and slash type games that were designed for big level brutality and stories that would pit you as Kratos up against the gods of Greece. And there was an initial trilogy which, I guess depending on what level you want story, like the story for me was relatively not weak but not strong. It was again to facilitate this hack and slash and puzzle building stuff, but it had some good moments, and then it sort of went away. Like they sort of did a couple of prequels and they did a couple of remakes or remasters, and you sort of felt like this was a franchise that maybe was a mid-2000s franchise. It wasn't going to come much past that. But then E3, I think 2016 came along, and they announced that there was going to be God of War on PS4, and there were some major changes. It was away from Greek mythology and into Norse mythology, which is another type of mythology that's going to be very close to our hearts, being of that origin, from a long, long time ago, but also, being the name of obviously our channel. And something that we both love. So it was something that was exciting. It looked like a different style at the time, and so my thought was like an outside sort of excitement. Like I'll get it, I'll give it a crack. But my expectations still weren't like through the roof. When I got the game, from the very first kind of beat, it was just for me. It had me. Kratos, with the beard and the full beard now in this Viking world and hacking at that tree, there was this deep sort of soundtrack to it. It just got me. And just a few things to note, like what they did was something unique to games, I believe, at this point, which is they used a single shot camera, no cuts at all, throughout the whole game, from the start to the finish, which is just absolutely incredible. A way to tell a story that way is brilliant, but what it does is it actually just keeps you going. It just keeps you going with the story, and so I wanted to review this one and get it out there. I'm gonna rip the band-aid off for anyone that's wondering. For me, this was definitely Game of the Year 2018. I don't think there's any debate that could be really had here. For me, it was just the biggest, like most epic game and story told that year. And we're going to get into the ratings in a minute, but do you want to add anything onto that, Sindri?
Honestly, there's not too much to say. I think the main point I just want to sort of focus on, though, is that one-shot camera. I think, again, this is like the first game that's ever done it, and it does something. Even if you yourself, when you're playing the game for the first time, you might not notice that that's what it's doing. I certainly didn't when I played it through with you the first time. It's not something you sort of pay attention to because you don't sort of think about it. It's just kind of subconscious, and yet you still spend the whole game immersed, feeling like you're really in this world because of what they did. But you still can't actually put your finger on it until maybe afterwards. And I genuinely think the thought that went into this game was actually genius. So let's get straight into the review part, because there's a lot of points to go through on each separate part, but definitely I think it was genius.
Yeah, so do we want to start with graphics then, which I've given as a 9.5 as well, which means for me it matches Red Dead Redemption 2's graphics from a previous video, but it means that those two are now the highest scoring graphics games that we've done. Do you agree with 9.5?
100%, yep. I think the graphics were almost entirely perfect.
Yeah, and to be honest, I was actually looking for I wanted to give it even higher, to be honest, because again, I didn't feel any glitches. I felt like it looked on the whole pretty perfect, to be honest. Facial expressions and everything else was just spot on, and it looked great. But I'm just remiss to ever give higher than a 9.5, to be honest. But yeah, 9.5 for graphics. It was an absolutely beautiful game. Beautiful game. The colors, the saturation, everything is beautiful. Gameplay, which is probably one of the weaker scores that I've given it. To be honest, I gave it an 8.5. Which I believe also brings it as to the highest gameplay game that I've given though so far. But my reason for not going higher, and again I could have, is just because in a couple of things that come up in combat, which I think overall is amazing, but just a couple of small weaknesses just pull it back. And the weaknesses that I mean is because of this single shot camera, sometimes it's hard when you're in a combat to know exactly where your enemy is. And then another thing, there's this puzzle thing where you've got this Leviathan axe, which is Kratos' kind of new weapon. And it freezes things, and you have these like gates and whatnot that you need to freeze in place by using a button. And sometimes if you don't get it exactly right, it doesn't actually stick it there, which is sometimes a little bit annoying. But those are the only two like nitpicking things that for me bring it down to an 8.5. What do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with that, but I also think that in some cases the gameplay is a little bit held back because of its sort of roots in the sort of hack and slashy like genre.
Yes.
I think it still is fantastic. It's really, really satisfying with certain enemies, especially the sort of like frost basic enemies that you can just kind of shatter with certain weapons. They just explode. Very, very satisfying. But again, it's still, its roots are in sort of a hack and slash genre. So again, there's a few gameplay mechanics that are maybe a little bit outdated in terms of combat because it's sort of based on a sort of genre that isn't really that popular anymore at all. So, but yeah, I think 8.5 is absolutely fair on gameplay. I think for the most part, it is absolutely fine.
And I think also the fights with the Valkyrie, which are obviously designed to be very, very tough. But there are some, I think, almost like it's hacked at times. That they can hack through your defenses and not get damaged by one of your attacks at times where it just doesn't seem plausible. But again, these are very small nitpicks, I think, bring it back. And an 8.5, as I said, is the highest score I've given out so far for gameplay. And I'm happy with 8.5. Story-wise, I sort of touched on it a bit earlier, but story of the first three games to me at a lot of times felt like convenience to get in these big fight scenes with Cyclops and the gods of Greece and whatnot, and I think that at times pulled it back on those games, but overall there was a story that had legs in it, and I think this almost is the natural way forward, and this game almost now makes the retrospect of those games story-wise improved as well, because now you know where it's kind of heading. And for me, the story of this game, which again is you can probably argue is really just excuses to get in certain like beats and to get in certain like boss fights and whatnot, but ultimately like it's a story that had me on the edge of my seat. The whole time I'm thinking, we're in this Norse world, we're up against, Norse gods, and we haven't yet been introduced to Thor or Odin, not once. It's amazing how they built this feeling, and build it, it's almost like building to a crescendo, this game, in terms of when, you have a son, and he doesn't know that you're a god and all the rest of it, and it's like building up to the moment when that's inevitably going to be revealed because you're going to have to kill a god, and it's built just to perfection. That being said, I can never give anything a perfect score, so I've given it an 8.6 again because I felt like the end goal is not to necessarily have a great story, but the end goal is to have fights between gods, and so there will be some conveniences that are put in to make that happen. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's something that from the very beginning, even before you even start playing the game, you know that it's in Norse mythology, and I think anybody who knows anything about mythology knows that Norse gods are often a lot more warlike than Greek gods. I think Greek gods, they do have their warlike, powerful gods, but I think Norse mythology very much so, almost everyone can hold their own in a fight. You can tell, all of them are wearing armor, they have their helmets, they have their weapons. So Kratos is already kind of a little bit, you know before you even pick up the game that you're going to be in for some interesting fights for sure. If nothing else. But obviously, there is a lot more else around these fights that make the game absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I think 8.6 on the story is very, very fair, especially as you get sort of towards the mid or like the mid to the end sections of the game. You get some really good sort of lore and backstory.
Yeah, and I think so. And this is probably more of a factor in a later point, but Mimir, who is the head that you end up, wearing on your waistband or whatever, he fills in the gaps when you're sort of in the boat traveling to places and whatnot, with telling stories that also fill in the lore as well, which is an excellent way to build the world and the atmosphere, which we'll obviously get onto in the very next point. One thing I want to say is, and this is a spoiler alert for anyone that's listening, if you haven't played it, stick your fingers in your ears for the next few seconds, but towards the end of the game, it then gets revealed that your son Atreus is actually your son Loki, of the same name. And I actually kind of felt like that was a bit of a cheap twist, which is again another reason why I can't score story above a 9. That was, I liked it, but I also didn't like it at the same time. And so from that, for that purpose, I have to drop it a little bit down.
Yeah, agreed. I think the last few sections of the game were pretty good. You get a lot of sort of like history. You find out a lot about sort of the wife character who died, who's sort of Kratos's wife. But yeah, I think that twist, by itself, was like in my opinion, single worst sort of decision in the game. It sort of threw me off a little bit. Didn't particularly enjoy it. I know what they were going for in Norse mythology there, but yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it. So yeah, that's why the score hasn't been put up to into the 9s.
Agreed. So then on to the next point, world/atmosphere. I've probably been a little bit harsh on it here as well, but again, 8.5 being a massive score. And Mimir builds into that, but also the fact that it really doesn't pick and choose in the lore. It sort of has a lot of everything. It has Fafnir, it has a lot of notes from Norse mythology. It has the Valkyries in there. It has Odin's ravens. It has so much that it does feel in a lot of ways that you have been built into the Norse world, and obviously going to different realms as well as part of this, which really build into it too. I guess what I would have liked, and it's not in the nature of these games, so I don't blame it, but what I would have liked is maybe to have some actually regular everyday people as well, because you get this idea that he's gone hiding. Essentially, he's trying to hide from who he really is and go against it, because he's basically killed all the Greek gods by now. So he's gone into this Norse world, but he doesn't live in the area where the everyday Vikings would have lived. It's kind of like in this magic forest where just down the road is Freya, and Brok and Sindri's forge as well. And you've got you know what I mean? It's not in the normal world, if that makes sense, which I think would have made a bit more sense. So even if it would have been just a small village or settlement where it doesn't have to be interaction, but it's there and it's there and you can see it, would have probably, for me, bumped this up to probably a 9 by itself.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I think we sort of touched on Mimir already, but his whole presence, sort of you can be walking and you might walk past something that sort of catches your eye a little bit, and he'll give you a full description of what it's supposed to be, what it in Norse mythology, a story behind it, maybe Thor had a fight with Jormungandr there or something like that, and it just constantly keeps you invested in the world. But yeah, as you said, I think the whole fact that every character and every sort of enemy is sort of supernatural or a god or something like that, rather than here's just a normal human. Even a character who's sort of presented as a normal human during the game for a little while, you then realize, oh no, this isn't just any old witch. This is also a god or goddess.
Yes.
So it's a little bit it's trying to fit a lot of people in, and I don't have a problem with that. But I think, it definitely would have been nice to see some normal people too.
Yeah, agreed. And again, it's a fairly small nitpick, and it's not that type of game. But I guess that would have been for me a big factor. Even if it was just a case of you can't go to the village, but you can just see the village at the bottom of the mountain, for example, on the other side. You can see that's and that Mimir probably can give you like that's a Viking settlement or whatever. I don't know, whatever would have been great. In terms of soundtrack, again, I probably could have scored it higher. I've given it an 8.5. A couple of reasons why it's an 8.5, which is again a really good score though, and that's because I think almost every musical moment fits perfectly with what's going on, and I think to pick out one of many moments where this is the case, as an example, is when Atreus is unconscious and is sick. And your character Kratos has come to the realization that he has to just appreciate who he is again, and gets back on the boat and goes back towards his house, and it goes dark and you see Athena and the music playing then, and when he gets back to his old weapons, the Blades of Chaos. For anyone, that's spoiler alert, too late, whatever, but you get the Blades of Chaos again, and that music right there, it just sums it up perfectly. So I think an 8.5 is probably a fair score there too. If anything, it's a little bit harsh.
Yeah, I think also like not even it's still part of the soundtrack, but it's not even like the music or whatever. It's just the ambient sounds you get when you're sort of sailing around or in the different worlds. Like you go to sort of hell with one L in later points of the game, and there's just you could sort of hear like the specters and like the sort of like howling of like ghosts and shit in the background, and it definitely it helps with the immersion and the atmosphere, and that's exactly what you want from the soundtrack. So yeah, I think 8.5, maybe a little bit harsh, but I think probably fair.
Yeah, well, it's funny you're saying 8.5 is harsh, whereas 8.5 so far I think is also the highest soundtrack score we've given.
Yeah.
To date, so that shows you that we're actually trying to hold back on this game rather than just piling on good stuff. We're trying to be critical as well. And here's the next one is the lowest score I think that the God of War gets. And again, there's a lot of things that could be harsh with it, but I feel like I can justify it. I've given it an 8.2 for overall immersion, and again, that is how immersed you are, how you are pulled in and feel like you are in it rather than out of it. And the reason why I've gone for an 8.2 rather than a higher score is because I think that there are a couple of moments, just a couple, where you're pulled out a little bit. And one of them is, for example, the reveal of Loki, being your son. That I felt like I was pulled out a little bit in that moment, because I had to sort of engage my brain and think, how can that work? How can that be? Rather than it being like obvious, if that makes sense, once that reveal happens. There's nothing worse than some reveals where it's like, there's some reveals where you get it and it doesn't take much brain power for you to go, oh, of course. Like some murder mysteries or whatever, when it is revealed to be, the wife's sister or whatever, and you think, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, of course. How come I didn't think of that before? Whereas this one, I was like, no, I feel like they've sort of just put a square peg in a round hole to make that work, and that pulled me out. So that's why I'm giving it an 8.2.
Yeah, again, with those sorts of decisions, like that Loki decision specifically, it does feel a little forced, and it just sort of reminds you that, yep, you're in a game. Like, you're not enjoying this world completely, because there are things that have sort of obviously been pushed for whatever reason. Like, obviously they had some sort of idea. I wish he stayed as just Atreus, to be honest. But yeah, I still think that the overall immersion is fantastic. You've got the sort of whole regions, the different worlds that you can go to. You can go to Hell, you can go to like Midgard, whatever. Even the loading screen where you go into Yggdrasil, I think it is, and you just kind of like walk around in a loop until the loading screen's done between worlds. Keeps you immersed, but yeah, again, I think obvious decisions that sort of pull you out of it keep it from being any higher. So yeah, I think 8.2 is fair.
Yep. Okay. Moving quickly on to wow factor. That's that intangible that we talk about. I've given it a 9 as a very high score, and there's again a few reasons. Right from the word go, when he's hacking down the tree with his Leviathan axe, and the grunt that he makes as he's putting in more and more effort, and obviously having some catharsis because this is to get wood to make ashes out of his wife and Atreus' mother right at the start of the game, to the single shot camera, which, as I said, has never been used, I believe, in games before, to the moment when you put your axe through the face of I can't remember if it was Magnai or the other one, was it Moda? I never remember his name, but the moment you put your axe through his face and actually kill a god, to when you're then you've got the world serpent coming to help you, and things like that, massive wows. And I think 9 is a good score there too.
Yeah, I agree. I think 9 is absolutely perfect for this. You've just got so many moments, even right up until the very, very last sort of cutscene in the game,
yes.
Which I could spoil it. I could say, hey, just don't listen to this part. I'm not going to, though. I think you should definitely play it through and get to that final cutscene, because it is crazy. It is crazy. So definitely
it's pretty awesome.
Just play it, and you'll see what we mean with the wow factor. You'll definitely be blown away.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, the first time you and I played it through together, I think I'd already done the first third of the game.
Yeah.
And then we together did the second 2/3. And I think there wasn't a single part where we weren't on the edge of our seat going, whoa, making those kinds of sounds. And to me, that in itself gives it a 9. Again, I feel like I'm being harsh and only giving it a 9. But I don't like scoring higher if I can help it.
Yeah, I think we're definitely averse to getting close to that 10, because I think in our minds 10 is the perfect score. Like, you cannot nitpick a single thing, and I'm there are certainly parts where you can sort of nitpick a little bit in God of War, but I think 9 is definitely I'm happy with giving it a 9 in wow factor. We did spend the whole game sort of just mouth open, with things happening.
Yeah, well, for anyone that's listening, and I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler, but at some point in the future, we're going to do a Witcher 3 review in the same format, and you might see a couple of scores that are quite close to 10s in that one. But the point is, I want us to save those higher scores for when it really, really, there's no other option. Because for me, I don't want to be and I'm not going to name any publications, but some of these hack kind of pieces that probably get paid to do it, or they don't want to lose out their early access from certain distributors and everything. But for me, when we give an 8 out of 10, it's a damn good game. Let's put it that way. That's what I want. And again,
we don't want to sort of delegitimize good games by giving not so good games similar scores. It just doesn't make sense to us. We really want to make sure that that 7s, 8s, 9s, anything close to a 10 is really, really good. Like, really good.
Yes.
So anything that's below that, it's not, scale it to what we're putting at the top, basically, and you'll see that it's, we're trying to be fair to the games at the top, not necessarily ruining or hacking apart the games at the bottom. We want it to be fair.
Correct. Correct.
So anyways, on to the next...
Yep. Sorry. And onto that. So Met Expectations is our final category. And again, I'll remind anyone that hasn't seen our other review videos at this point, a 5 would be Met Expectations dead on. Anything above a 5 is exceeded expectations, and anything below is kind of underwhelmed, not quite there in terms of what we expected, which is a really harsh one to score on, because it's really dependent on us rather than them almost. And so with that in mind, God of War PS4, I've given it an 8 on Met Expectations, because I think it not only exceeded my expectations, but it far exceeded it, and it was just on a whole nother level to what I was even anticipating.
Yep, agreed on that one. I think an 8 may be a tiny bit harsh as well, but again, we got to temper it a little bit. It definitely, we're expecting a hack and slash game like all the other God of Wars, and I think we got a fantastic sort of cinematic and story experience as well. So yeah, I think 8 is absolutely fantastic. It exceeded our expectations by quite a large margin.
And that brings the overall score, if we average out each category, to 8.6 out of 10, which I think is a damn good score, given what we just spoke about. That is so far the highest we've given anything. And that makes it, definitely our 2018 game of the year, I believe. There's a bit of debate over what came second and third, which we'll get into, and you'll see that this week with all of our review videos that come out. But essentially, an 8.6 out of 10 is a game that you definitely need to go and buy. Whatever the price, whatever the cost to you, whatever situation you're in, go and buy it, go and play it, and experience this. This is an experience. If you ask me, what is one of the best forms of any medium to come out in the last like 3 or 4 years, including TV shows, movies, anything, in terms of a story that is told, is this one. This one is right near the top of the pile, if you ask me. I'd rather play this game than go and see a lot of the movies that are coming out these days, put it that way.
Yep, and I think with that, definitely stay tuned for, I guess, our Witcher one that we might do in the future, because that'll probably be the next closest score. Those two will be very interesting to see sort of the differences between the two, and maybe why we think one is a better game than the other. But for now, thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll catch you next time.
See you next video.